Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we resume our programming after taking the month of August off. As we've been developing Humanity Rising since May of 2020, in the depths of the pandemic, Ubiquity University, which is the convener of Humanity Rising, and over 350 co-sponsoring organizations have sought to enable humanity literally to rise by bringing to our collective attention crucial issues of human concern, what we've been calling code red issues. There was the pandemic, there was the challenge to democracy, climate change, the global crisis confronting youth, health. There were the issues pertaining to artificial intelligence. And over the last several years, we've also been paying attention to the mysterious but extraordinary phenomenon of UFOs. And episodically, we've had several people on to brief us on the latest developments. We're starting our fall programming today with really one of the most momentous announcements that has occurred for some time in certainly contemporary history. The United States government has taken the decision, reinforced by congressional legislation mandating that it do so, to begin a process of gathering the evidence around what they're now calling unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, gathering that into a special office that has been set up by the US Congress, and then initiating a process of disclosing this evidence to the American and the world public. The gravity of this decision could not be overestimated. For the first time in human history, we are being told by the greatest power currently on Earth that we are not alone, that extraterrestrial intelligences exist, that they have been present and operating on planet Earth for some time, and that there is evidence of all kinds of contact. Sightings, aircraft that have been found and taken into custody by not only the United States government, but by other governments, experiences with the extraterrestrials, and all kinds of ways that we humans can begin a process of attuning ourselves to communication with these galactic beings. We are going to hear today from Daniel Sheehan, who has been on our program a number of times before, talking about various issues pertaining to constitutional rights in the United States, but also because Daniel has been involved in this UFO, or now called the UAP issue, for many, many decades, and has been involved as a general counsel to many of the organizations that have been involved in the UAP issue, general counsel to many of the people like John Mack, the head of clinical psychology at Harvard, who got into trouble from Harvard University for his research into UAP abductions, and a book that he wrote to many of the current whistleblowers that have been speaking out about this issue And this, of course, has been very much in the news. So the human race, everyone, is approaching its ET moment, where this phenomenon that has been marginalized and been trivialized and kept absolutely secret and classified for nearly 100 years since the first contact that at least the United States government had with these extraterrestrials dates back to the 1930s. And all of a sudden, due to a bipartisan consensus in the US Congress, in both the Senate and the House, this information is beginning a long overdue process of collection and dissemination into the public domain. So I want to welcome Dan Sheehan, who's been a very good friend of mine for just about 50 years since we met back at Harvard Divinity School while we were both studying there. And both of us have had various grand adventures together, including around the UAP issue. So Danny, welcome to our program. Thank you for joining us. And why don't we start with you summarizing your involvement with this issue and then describing for us what is now happening in the US government generally that's being spearheaded by the US Congress toward disclosure into the public domain.
Great, thanks, Jim. Well, my initial interest in this whole issue, like that many of the people that are listening here this morning and watching, began when I was very, very young, and I discovered that what stars were. And when I was like 5 years old or something, and was allowed to actually stay out at night under supervision of my parents, and realized that these stars came out at night, and that they were stars. They were like suns for other planets around the universe. And I was kind of overwhelmed by the magnitude of this dimension of reality. And I was puzzled as I was growing up why it was that people didn't pay more attention to this. It just seemed that some of the kind of strange things that we all did down here on the planet, primarily to each other, seemed to be completely inconsistent with the actual reality of the scope and scale of what was going on all around us. And it seemed to me that it was perfectly obvious, if these were suns like our sun, that there would be planets around those suns, and that there would be people on them. And so I used to, when I could, kind of get to sit out in the grass as night came on, and watch for the stars to come out. And I would pick one particular star, and I would sit and kind of look at it. And I realized that I thought, of course, when I was little, that these were pulsing, actually, as distinct from it just being an effect of our atmosphere. That it looked like they were like signaling us with these pulses like coming through space to us. And I said, this is really cool. Here is I'm sitting out in the yard in the little grass in my little hometown up in the Adirondack Mountains in New York, that there are beings sitting in their yards around the universe looking out at our star. And I thought this was cool. I thought that this was a kind of a communion, if you will, with these other beings, and that I carried this kind of perspective with me as I went through high school, and I decided that I would be an astronaut, that I would go to the Air Force Academy, which was just starting when I was a teenager. It just began, and I would become an astronaut, and I would get to go into outer space and get to meet these people and help participate in this extraordinarily interesting period of our human family, where we actually stepped off our planet into the universe and discovered that there were literally millions of other planets around the universe with life on them. And so I ended up being one of the top nominees for the United States Air Force Academy in high school when I graduated in 1963. I know I look a lot younger, But 1963, I graduated from high school. It was one of the top candidates for the United States Air Force Academy appointment in the state of New York. And so I was interviewed by Senator Jacob Javits, who was one of the two Republican senators for our state at that time. And when I went to meet with him, he asked me why I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. And I told him that, that I wanted to be an astronaut. And he smiled and said, oh, yes, 1963, John Glenn going around the Earth, orbiting, and all young American boys want to be astronauts. And he said, well, but why do you particularly want to be an astronaut? I said, oh, well, because I think this is an extraordinary moment in history where our whole human family is going to be encountering these extraterrestrial beings that are elsewhere in the galaxy. And he looked at me and said, you actually believe that there's extraterrestrial life here in our galaxy? And I said to him, well, sure, so do you. I mean, you must. You're a United States senator. You know, I mean, everybody would realize that this is true. And he was kind of taken totally aback. And he said, well, look, Dan, I hadn't expected this kind of a conversation here over this appointment, but I have to be candid with you that, I've already given the appointment to the Air Force Academy to the son of one of my major contributors. That's the way the world really is. He said, he said, but look, I'll give you the appointment to the Naval Academy. And I said, I'm not into boats. I'm into airplanes. I want to fly. I want to be an astronaut. He said, no, you can be a pilot if you go to the Navy. I said, well, look, I'm not into boats. I'm into airplanes. And he said, well, look, then you can get the appointment from your congressional representative. He said, Carlton King. I know Carlton King. He's your congressman there from the congressional district. I'm sure that you're like one of the top handful of nominees in the entire state. So you'll get your congressional nomination. He said, and remember, he said, I need to tell you a secret. He said, after you've been in the Air Force Academy for like a year, nobody really remembers who the senatorial appointments were or who the congressional appointments were. He said, so I said, all right, we'll do that. He said, I'll give Carlton King a call and make sure you get that appointment. Well, it turns out Carlton King gave the appointment to the son of the mayor of Glens Falls, the Republican mayor of Glens Falls, who was number 7 in our congressional district out of the 42 districts in the state of New York. And so I was kind of flabbergasted that this had happened. And I decided I'd probably better become a lawyer, because it seemed to me that the whole system was a little bit out of tune. I'd been raised to understand how the Constitution worked and how the government worked, and how in a democracy we were supposed to be trying to do the best thing for our country. And so I thought it was a little out of tune. And so I would become a lawyer and figure out how to help do this. And then I would get back to the job of getting into outer space and getting to meet the extraterrestrial beings. Well, after a few years out in practice, I realized that our government wasn't just out of tune. It was playing an entirely different song than we'd been taught. That we weren't really, bringing democracy to the world. We weren't increasing human rights around the world, etc. We were engaged in this major aggression to seek out and maintain our continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials on the planet for the benefit of our major corporations who funded the campaigns of all these people. And so I said, oh, wow. So I sort of got trapped for a while in this process. But I ended up, once I realized that as a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, that I could basically win any case I wanted to take up. So I decided I'd better have the right clients if I was going to do this. So I ended up becoming the attorney for the United States Jesuit Order, the largest single order in the Catholic Church, and they were very progressive and working on major public justice things. So I ended up, after being in Harvard Law School and then going back to divinity school, where you and I met, I ended up becoming legal counsel for the Jesuit National Headquarters in their social ministry office, which had to do with public policy issues. And it was there that in 1976, actually, just after November, when President Jimmy Carter was elected, it turns out one of the very first things he did, because he had seen a UFO when he was governor of Georgia. And so one of the very first things he did after he was elected on November 4th of 1976 is he called in the head of the Central Intelligence Agency to ask him to give him a briefing on this UFO issue and whether extraterrestrial life really existed in our galaxy. And the CIA director at that time happened to be George H.W. Bush, who had been appointed to that position by Gerald Ford, who had taken over in 1974 when Nixon resigned. And so that Bush said to him, well, look, I want to remain your CIA director. And I want to be like J. Edgar Hoover was, that no matter whether it was a Democrat or Republican president, he stayed on as the FBI director. I want to do the same thing, to be the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. And President Carter said, no, I have somebody else in mind for my CIA director. And so George Bush refused to tell him, refused to give him the information about the UFO stuff. So President Carter contacted the Congress, the Science and Technology Division, and had them task the Congressional Research Service of the Library of Congress to investigate this question of UFOs and how real they were and whether they were directly linked to an extraterrestrial civilization. And I was contacted by Dr. Marcia Smith. Dr. Marcia Smith was the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service of the Library of Congress. And she asked if I would become special counsel to this study, to help them do the study. And would I reach out to the Vatican as a legal counsel at the Jesuit National Headquarters and see if we could get access to the information at the Vatican in Rome about the issue of UFOs and extraterrestrial life. So I actually was cleared by Father Bill Davis and the Jesuit provincials to do this. And so I became special counsel to this special investigation that President Carter wanted to conduct. And I reached out to the Vatican, and to my surprise, they said, no, we're not going to give you the information. And so I ended up remaining the special counsel. I was asked to, for example, give a briefing to the top 50 scientists at SETI, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in Pasadena, California. I was asked to give a special closed-door 3-hour seminar to them on the theological implications of contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. So I did that, and I ended up bringing the information to the Jesuit headquarters, and I was actually given permission to get access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book. And Project Blue Book was a top secret program that was undertaken by the United States Air Force to investigate the UFO phenomenon. And when it became known that they were doing it, they ended up using the Project Blue Book as a cover-up for the fact that they knew that there were UFOs. They knew UFOs were a craft of some sort that had an intelligence behind it, and they became convinced from their study in Project Blue Book that this was not any of our aircraft, and it was not coming from Russia, and it was not coming from China or any other major highly technologically developed country. And so they started writing memos to each other in the Air Force and in the military and in the CIA saying, these appear to be extraterrestrial. And they tried to figure out what to do about it. But one of the first things they decided to do about it was to keep it absolutely secret. And it turns out that they were rationalizing this within the federal executive branch on the grounds that they wanted to get at the technology. They wanted to see if they could get access to one of these craft and find out what its technology was, because they were performing in this extraordinary way. They would be going tens of thousands of miles an hour inside our atmosphere with no apparent friction. They would turn on a dime, going 10,000 miles an hour, and they would turn a total 90-degree angle and be coming out of the 90-degree turn as fast as they went in. They would come from over 80,000 feet down to the surface of our oceans, in 0.7 of 1 second, and come to a complete stop, generating something like 600 Gs of force on anybody in the vehicle. and then they would go underwater and travel at over 100 miles an hour underwater. And so all of this was being kept completely secret by our government. But the American people started becoming more and more curious about this, because people would see the vehicles, and then there began to be reports starting around 1964 or so with the famous Betty and Barney Hill, the interrupted journey in Exeter, in New Hampshire, of actual face-to-face contact with some of the occupants of these UFO vehicles. And this began, of course, to spread like wildfire among the population. And then it started occurring other places in the world. And other people in the world started getting extraordinarily interested in this subject. And so everybody assumed that the United States, being the leading military power in the world, must know about this. And so the different countries of the world started trying to get the United States to level with them and tell them what was going on. But the executive branch in the United States wouldn't do it. Not only that, but the executive branch would not even brief Congress, which is, in fact, the government of the United States, according to major United States Supreme Court decisions. When it comes down to it, they said in Youngstown sheet and tube, this very famous case that happened back in 1954, I believe, they said, no, when push comes to shove, the Congress of the United States is the government. They pass the laws, and the executive branch is just supposed to enforce them. And therefore, one would have assumed that the executive branch would have been duty bound to brief the United States Congress about this, but they not only refused to brief them, but they lied to them. They lied that the United States executive branch, the military services, the Central Intelligence Agency, the NSA, others lied to Congress and said, it's not true. We don't know anything about UFOs. They're not even real. That they really are just misidentifications of things. People have seen flocks of birds, or searchlights reflecting off clouds, or worse yet, swamp gas. They had a whole series of these preposterous explanations for this, and the people became more and more serious, more and more dubious about the credibility of the government. And as it became more and more obvious that the executive branch had a habit of lying to the people and to Congress, from the Vietnam War and the revelation of the Pentagon Papers, that I happen to have the good fortune of being one of the lawyers for the New York Times that actually secured the publication of the Pentagon Papers, the Watergate burglary, the Church Committee's investigations of the illegal activities of the CIA in their lying to Congress, et cetera. So what happened is the level of distrust of the government began to increase to such a degree that there actually formed inside the United States an entire element within our citizenry who fundamentally and profoundly distrusted the government of the United States. And that one of the major features of this subgroup within our community in the United States were the people that believed in UFOs. And so that they would start holding annual conferences around the country at different places. Hundreds and then thousands of people would come to these gatherings. And not only did they begin talking about the fact that UFOs were real and that it appeared to be evidence of an extraterrestrial civilization, but this was just one example of the United States government lying to its people. And it started taking on this kind of political overtone of challenging the credibility of the United States Central Intelligence Agency, the intelligence agencies, and then they actually began to question the efficacy of Congress, that Congress was somehow not in charge, that they'd lost control of the government. And so they started shaming the Congress. In a sense, the public was thinking the Congress people were inept and incompetent, that they weren't able to control the intelligence communities, the covert operations, the assassination programs that were going on by the executive branch. And so that finally there came a point where a number of people inside the executive department who had been involved in doing some of these investigations of the UFOs, trying to figure out, where they came from, what was the secret of their technology, what did they spent all this time trying to figure out how they could capture these UFOs and get at their technology. So basically, they could build better fighter jets, or they could build nuclear missiles that would go much faster and be able to get to each other's countries faster. And so the bottom line is, this went on all the way until the end of the Cold War. When officially on December 31st of 1991, when President Gorbachev, with whom both you and I have met, and you were working very closely with, we were working initially out of the Jesuit headquarters together to try to get the Soviet Union to respond if the United States could be persuaded to start to disassemble some of our nuclear weapons. Would they agree to respond and reciprocate so that we could start to reduce this horrible threat that was facing our planet? Because, in part, people who were having direct encounters with the UFOs and with, in their good faith belief, having direct contact with the occupants, one of the things that the occupants of these UFOs kept on communicating to our people was that you guys have got to get rid of these nuclear weapons. This is totally insane. You people are going to totally destroy not only yourselves, but you're going to destroy the life-generating capacity of your planet if you have this all-out thermonuclear war. And also you have to stop polluting your planet. You're spewing all of these carbon products into the atmosphere, huge billowing factories, and you're contaminating your planet. You're going to destroy the ecosystem of your planet, and the entire climate system will collapse. And so these were the two things that people, human beings, who believed they were having direct face-to-face encounters with the occupants of the UFO vehicles, kept reporting that they're warning us. They're trying to warn us about what we're doing to ourselves here. And so there began to develop inside the UFO community, among our human family across the planet, this kind of mythos that these UFO people were here to help us. They were coming here to save us from ourselves, to tell us about nuclear weapons, to get rid of them, etc. But then what happened inside the national security state, as the national security state began to be more and more secretive and more clandestine, as this institution developed after the passage of the National Security Act of 1947, and the CIA got created. That what they started to do is they started to lobby on behalf of subtly generating this theory that these UFOs were a threat, that somehow they constituted a threat to our entire human family. And basically what we needed to do was spend billions of dollars figuring out some ultra secret program by means of which we could combat these UFO vehicles, that we could somehow master their technology. We could engage them successfully in a military resistance because, and so they started filtering information out to Hollywood and other places to do movies, pretending that these beings were hostile, that they were coming here to eat us, and to rape our women and steal our children. They came up with this entire kind of mythos about this, which they were kind of filtering out into the community. So this major dynamic really sort of came to a head back in 2017, when we get into sort of the modern story that is going on here. I had become involved after having been legal counsel to the special study that was done on behalf of President Carter. That was in 1977, 78. I ended up becoming engaged by Dr. John Mack at Harvard, whom you mentioned, Jim, in 1994, when he got dragged up in front of a rump faculty committee at Harvard University. As I mentioned, I graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and you and I had gone to Harvard Divinity School together. So John Mack, when he was dragged up in front of this committee, this faculty committee at Harvard, for publishing a book about this particular subject, he reached out to me and asked if I would legally represent him, and I did. And in that capacity, two things really happened. I was tasked by Dr. John Mack to reach out to all of the different major leaders that were in the UFO movement around the world, the researchers and the experiencers, et cetera, to assemble a set of witnesses that we could present at Harvard University to confront the Harvard University that, you know, was one of the at least leading institutions of education in Western civilization, and try to present this information to them because they were basically asserting, in fact, stated that it was ridiculous for anybody to believe that extraterrestrial life existed or that the UFOs had anything to do with them. And so we said, oh, good, but then we'll show you. And so Dr. Mack asked me to interview all the different people in the world whom he happened to know and introduced me to them. And so I got to meet Stanton Friedman, I got to meet Bud Hopkins, I got to meet, you know, all the major people that were working in the field. And John also started introducing me to direct experiencers who actually believe that they're sitting in their home on a Friday evening and they see this light come down and like a saucer lands out in the field next to their house. And they get up and go outside and end up meeting them and talking with them telepathically. And so I started getting to meet all these different people throughout the world through the good offices of Dr. John Mack and graciously Harvard University, unintended by them, but it continued my education at Harvard University. And so I ended up getting to meet a lot of these people. And then I became legal counsel for the Project for Extraordinary Research at Cambridge with Dr. Mack, and got to meet a lot more of the people involved. And so I was legal counsel there all the way up until like 2004, from 1994. And so that whole 10-year period, I became more and more knowledgeable about what was going on. And I was contacted by Dr. Stephen Greer in 2001 and was asked to become legal counsel to the Disclosure Project. And we gathered together the testimony of literally hundreds of extraordinarily credible people, you know, law enforcement officers, priests and ministers and school teachers and, and government officials. And what we did is we culled through these people. I was asked to do this for the Disclosure Project and present 24 of these people to the United States Congress in 2001 at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. We put them under oath and had them testify publicly. And not a single one of the members of Congress would come over to the National Press Club to listen to them, but they would have their staff come over and kind of hide out in the corner and not acknowledge who they were and try to get access to this information. And so I had that whole experience for 20 years as legal counsel to the Disclosure Project. And I became legal counsel to the citizens' hearings on disclosure in 2013 that Steve Bassett helped organize. So I got to meet more and more and more people. And it was in that context that I was contacted in 2017 by Lou Elizondo. And Louis Elizondo had become the executive director of the top secret program inside the Pentagon to investigate the UFO phenomenon. And he had become so frustrated. Just was that he had become extremely frustrated by the fact that he would go to contact people inside the executive branch whom he was certain would have to know about this. You know, the Secretary of Defense or the head of intelligence or the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that he would reach out and try to contact them. And he became convinced that they didn't know about this, that they were not being briefed in by this. And he became convinced that there was some extraordinarily undemocratic process going on here that didn't seem to comport with the constitutional structures of our government, that there was some secret state that was functioning that knew about this special body of information, and they were concealing it not only from the American people, but from Congress and from actual executives in the government, all the way up to the president of the United States. That they thought that they were somehow endowed with some special authority to keep this completely secret. and decide what they were going to do about it. And what they were deciding to do about it was still trying to figure out how to make a weapons system that could combat these people by seizing their own technology and back engineering it. And so Lou Elizondo became so frustrated about this that he wrote a letter to Secretary of Defense Mattis to telling him about this, that he thought that there was something terribly wrong with this whole program. And it turns out the people in the executive branch between Lou Elizondo and Secretary of Defense Mattis shut off his letter, wouldn't let the letter get delivered to him. They actually intercepted the letter and concealed it from the Secretary of Defense Mattis. And so Lou Elizondo got so upset that, or not angry, losing his temper or anything, but he became so convinced that there was something really undemocratic going on and unconstitutional going on, that what he did is he reached out and began communicating with Christopher Mellon. Chris Mellon was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence under both President Clinton and under W. Bush. And so Lou reached out to him and said, look, there's something terribly wrong here. There's this whole secret operation going on inside the government, and they're not only not briefing the president or not briefing the Secretary of Defense, not briefing the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but that they're actively lying to them and saying that there's no such thing, that we don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing here to see. And the bottom line is, Lou and Chris Mellon, they took steps to secure the declassification of 3 specific videos that had been taken by F-18 Super Hornet gun cameras off from our American fighter planes who had encountered UFOs and videoed them in the gun cameras that are in their craft. And they got these declassified, and Lou Elizondo resigned from the Defense Department and took these videos to Leslie Kean, who's a longtime friend and a person who's been a journalist in writing stories about this UFO phenomenon. And then she went to Ralph Blumenthal, who's another fellow that I've known for some time. And Ralph had written a biography about Dr. John Mack, actually. And he was a reporter for the New York Times. And so Leslie went to Ralph Blumenthal, and together they went to the editors of the New York Times and extraordinarily persuaded them to publish this information, to publish the videos, and to publish an extensive investigative piece that was co-authored by Leslie and Ralph. And it appeared on the front page of the New York Times on December 17th of 2017. And all of a sudden, there it was on the front page of the New York Times, that the United States Pentagon knew that the UFOs were real, that they were positive that they were not Russian. They knew they weren't ours from our secret program, no matter what progress we had made on trying to back engineer these things, that the source of these things was not from the United States, and it was not from China, and it was not from Russia. And there was no known tech source of this on our planet. And they began using terms like that. This didn't come from our planet. This is not anything that was built on our world. And they were implicitly communicating information about the fact that these appeared to be from someplace else. And that began that event on December 17th of 2017 began the actual sort of modern era, if we can use that term, of the disclosure process. And so that what happened is Lou Elizondo, all of a sudden the United States Pentagon, inside the Pentagon, they started issuing false statements saying, we don't know who Lou Elizondo is. There never was any such secret program. We don't know anything about UFOs. They went right back to the same old ledger and started just lying about it. And so Lou got really upset, saying that they were libeling him and slandering him, and so he ended up reaching out to me, actually. So here, all of a sudden, a deep insider from the executive branch, who was the head of the top secret program investigating UFOs for the Pentagon, reaches out to me, legal counsel for the Disclosure Project, and for Dr. John Mack, and one of the attorneys for the New York Times when we published the Pentagon Papers, along with Dan Ellsberg, that he reaches out to me to represent him in filing a complaint with the Inspector General's office of the United States Defense Department. And so we end up going to, before the Inspector General, we go to the Pentagon, and this great big huge set of buildings they've got next to the Pentagon, which is the Inspector General's office. And we get into these little secret rooms. And, at first everybody was saying, oh, poor Lou is going to be getting excoriated, by these people, just like happened to Dr. John Mack. But to the contrary, what happened was, after about 2 or 3 minutes, they were just fascinated, leaning across the table, getting briefed by Lou Elizondo, because they had classified clearances. And so he could just brief them on all the stuff that he knew about. So they were sitting there with their eyes getting as big as saucers, and being completely flabbergasted. Even the Inspector General's office of the Defense Department, had been briefed out, of this whole program. So I began to become active with Lou and Chris Mellon and a number of other people that had been insiders inside the executive branch, who wanted to follow the constitutionally authorized procedures by means of which we could get this information out. And so what they began doing is working with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, people over on the House side, in the House Oversight Committee, and they began crafting legislation. And so there are 2 pieces of legislation that I want to sort of put in front of everybody here. The first one was passed on December 22nd of 2022. This is like a year ago or so. And this piece of legislation, initiated by the Senate Intelligence Committee and later passed by the House of Representatives and Senate both, and signed by President Biden, established an office called, it started out as the Unidentified Aerial and Underwater Phenomenon Joint Program Office, that they were going to set it up between the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense, and they were setting up this office, and therefore any whistleblower, anybody inside any agency of the United States government, any military service, any intelligence agency, any Defense Department agency, and very importantly, any private corporate contractors, military contractors who had any information at all about UFOs and felt that they've been restricted from telling anybody about it, more specifically Congress, that they could come forward and give this information to a special panel, a special office that was going to be set up now at the order of Congress and by the order of the president when he signed it into law. And they created this office, which they turned out calling the All Domain Anomalous or Anomaly Resolution Office. They called it AARO. It was, in the government, you have to have nicknames for everything, right? And so they called it the AARO office. And Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick was put in charge of this, and they staffed this office up, and they remained available following December 22nd of 2022. And they said, we're available for any whistleblower that wants to come through the door and give us any information that you've ever had, anything that you heard, anything you saw, anything you know about personally. You can bring the information to us, right? And so that was step one. And so that AARO office began to get people coming to their office, telling them things that they knew, and that they've been prohibited earlier from revealing to anybody, because this was actually a way above top secret. This was the most important secret of the United States government. more secret than the most detailed information about nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons strategy. This was, it was at a level of cosmic classification. And so that some people began to come forward and bring the information to Dr. Kirkpatrick and his people. Then what happened is the Congress decided that in addition to that, they would want to not only make an opening for whistleblowers and to protect them against any retaliation, which the first act did back in December of 2022, they were going to pass a new piece of legislation that is going to be passed now on or about December 22nd of 2023. That's going to be coming up now at the end of this session, which is starting right this week, right? And that is this bill. That has my own markings on it, but this is a bill that has been drafted by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and it is amendment number 797 of Senate Bill 2226. Now that's just the technical term for it. But what this is the new statute that's getting ready to be passed. So all of our listeners are kind of brought into kind of this little known world of what's going on in Washington, D.C. This has not been passed yet, but it's getting ready to be passed. And what this does is it sets up a board, a panel, basically, that's going to be appointed by President Biden. There are 9 people on the panel. And this panel is now, the statute is ordering all of the 6 military services, all 18 of the national intelligence agencies, all of the myriad Defense Department agencies, and all of the corporate military contractors, ordering them to turn over every piece of information they've got about the UFO phenomenon and about the non-human intelligence that is behind the UFOs. They're ordered to turn it over to this committee within 180 days of the creation of the committee, right? And then the committee is ordered by this statute to publicly release all of the information that has been held by our United States government from 25 years ago or earlier. So that gets you all the way from as of January 1st of 1945, from January 1st of 1945 all the way up until 25 years ago. Any information that any of those groups have ever acquired about UFOs or the intelligence, non-human intelligence behind them, has to be publicly revealed by the committee within 180 additional days. So we're talking about a 1-year period here that we are now getting ready to enter into, starting on December 22nd, where there is this mandated disclosure that is getting ready to take place. Now, there is a provision in the act that says if the proffering agency believes that something is so potentially undermining of the national security of the United States for some reason, that they need to have that piece of information postponed, not kept secret, but at least postponed, the public revelation of it. They have to file a special application, and they put it into this postponed category of information. And this law sets up an unidentified anomalous phenomenon records review board. And this board is then ordered to design and to present to the president a plan for controlled disclosure, a controlled disclosure campaign plan that has to be provided to the president. And the rest of the information that is even postponed beyond the 180-day period of release has to be released pursuant to a concrete plan. And the period for the duration of this entire activity is 7 years. It says on the face of the statute, there's a 7-year period during which this postponed information has to be released to the public. And very importantly, that this statute actually exercises the power of the government of eminent domain to seize control over any materials that have ever been recovered, because there's now testimony has come down on July 12th, I think it was, or July 26th, that there was public testimony before the House Oversight Committee, their subcommittee on national security, that David Grush, who was the one of the directors of the secret program on UFOs after Lou Elizondo resigned back in 2017, one of the new people that came on to run the secret program inside the Office of Naval Intelligence, David Grush, came forward and testified under oath to Congress that based on the information that he acquired in that extreme top secret post that he held, he is convinced that we are in possession, our United States government is in possession of a fully intact, non-human spacecraft, and that we have recovered the bodies of occupants of such a vehicle. Now, one might think that that kind of explosive testimony would have been all over the front pages and on every newscast in the country and in the world. But the Central Intelligence Agency and elements inside the Defense Department immediately retaliated by attacking David Grush and saying, David Grush, you know, when he was in combat in Afghanistan, is suffering from post-traumatic stress. And therefore, you know, he can't be trusted, you know, so that they've gone back to the same old memo of trying to discredit the people who are attempting to bring this information forward. But the fact of the matter, that particular cat is out of the bag now. And so there's been sworn testimony on the part of an entirely credible, highly placed government official in the program has come forward and testified to Congress under oath that this legacy group is in possession of an intact spacecraft that is of non-human origin. And we are in possession of the bodies of some of the beings from such a craft. Okay. And so now that's the situation that we're in. This is an extraordinary period. We're just coming back into Washington. I'm flying out of here Wednesday morning to go back to Washington, D.C. To be in meetings with people in the Senate Intelligence Committee and others, and in the House Oversight Committee, et cetera, that we're in the process of initiating a period where the president is going to appoint within 45 days after the passage of this act, which is scheduled tentatively for December 22nd of 2023. Within 45 days, the president has to nominate 9 people to sit on this panel. And the Senate, just like Supreme Court justices, are going to be reviewing that. And they have to give their advice and consent to the people that the president nominates. If they disapprove of any given one person that President Biden nominates, then he replaces them with someone else, just like a Supreme Court justice. But this extraordinarily high-level process is getting ready to commence now. And so that somewhere in the middle of February of 2024, this panel is going to be put together and basically approved. And then the 180-day clock starts to run. And so within 6 months of this mid-February kind of standing up of this committee, all of these different agencies in the United States government that are part of this legacy program have to turn over the information to this particular panel. And then they have another 180 days to go through the process of releasing, number one, all of the information that the United States government came into possession of prior to 25 years ago, which is going to include Roswell, it's going to include the Aztec sightings, it's going to include, you know, Betty and Barney Hill information, it's going to include all of that stuff. Okay. And then there's going to begin another 180-day period during which this information that they want to continue to postpone is going to be put over into the hands of this panel. And they're going to start deciding what the controlled disclosure plan is going to be to get the president to sign off on it. So that's what's happening right now. This is kind of a lot of information for people to have all at one time, but it's important now that the people now have this information. 99.999% of the people in the country don't know that this is going on right now. And so that now our people do know here that are in Humanity Rising, and that we need to have intelligent discussions about this, because our New Paradigm Institute, from our Romero Institute, we've set up the New Paradigm Institute. We're opening offices in Washington, D.C. this week, and are going to be overseeing this whole process on behalf of the citizenry, okay? And that we have been asked to help nominate people to this panel, this 9-member panel. So you and I have been engaged in this discussion over the past several days of figuring out who we're going to recommend to be nominated by the president to this panel. You're going to be heading up our Washington office that I'm going in Wednesday to set the office up for you. It's the only civilian building inside the federal compound. The federal compound that includes all the House of Representatives, the Congress, the Senate offices and everything, that our office building is there at 110 Maryland Avenue. We're immediately next door to the Senate Intelligence Committee and across the street from the Capitol building. We're going to be participating in this process, and we want all of our people in Humanity Rising to keep track of this. We will be briefing them. You will be briefing all the people still, that Humanity Rising is not going to stop rising. So we're going to be briefing everybody on this and keeping everybody up to date on what's going on. And we're going to appreciate the participation of all of the people that are listening and bringing information forward to us. And that's what we're going to be doing.
Thank you so much, Danny. You've given a brief history of everything related to the UFOs, now called the UAPs. So thank you for that. And as Danny just indicated, everyone, I've accepted his invitation to go back to Washington to work with him in this special office that will seek to both interface with the government agencies and processes, and also to interface with the global public, the major religious institutions and civic institutions. Because if you take in the gravity of what Danny is saying, that there's now a deliberate intention on the part of the US Congress to gather this information and disseminate it in a methodical way over a 7-year period to the world public. How we absorb this information and the kind of narrative that the human family develops about our contact with these extraterrestrial intelligences and civilizations is a seminal moment in the evolution of our species, quite literally. Because as Danny has said, the message that seems to be common among all the people that are having experiences with these beings is that we need to stop destroying ourselves and destroying the planet as we begin the process of initiating sustained contact. So for me to be able to go back and work with my old friend and others in this process, I consider, one of the most important things I've ever done. And I enthusiastically accepted Danny's invitation. And I would just say, as Danny just indicated, this is not meaning any severance or abandonment of Humanity Rising, but really Humanity Rising being now expanded, in addition to all the other issues we'll continue to moderate around, it'll become a conduit for the latest information about what's happening in this momentous issue. And within that context, Danny, I want to ask you a question that popped up in the chat by Roberto Schifo about the viability of this process given the volatility of US politics and a presidential election coming up. Could a next president, for example, overturn all this? How do you view the ongoing kind of politics around this disclosure as it unfolds?
Well, it's turning our attention to the relationship between this body of information that I've just conveyed to you and the activities of the present political moment. That number one, despite all of the kind of self-generated polls on the part of the media that want to make this look like a really close horse race that is getting ready to take place over the period of the next year, between now and November of 2024 for the presidential election. The reality of having the Republican Party functionally wedded, the Republican National Committee at least, wedded to nominating Donald Trump as their nominee, and the Democratic National Committee being wedded to nominating Joe Biden, and basically telling everybody else to stand aside in both parties. The reality is that it's 90% likely, as we sit here now, that the contest as of June of 2024 is going to be reduced to a contest between Donald Trump as the Republican Party nominee and Joe Biden for the Democratic nominee. And in my opinion, that's going to result in a substantial, if not massive, win for President Biden, because that you're going to have tons of evidence that's going to be presented to the American public in the series of these 4 trials that are going to be going on over Trump. And even though there's maybe 18% of the people in the country that are the people that Lincoln used to refer to, saying you can fool some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. These are the people you can fool all the time. And so there's about 18% of the people who are going to stick with Donald Trump. Okay, and now given the fact that only half of the people in the country vote, that gives them, it comes up to like 36% of the voting public. So assume he gets 40% of the popular vote. This is going to be like a 60-40 wipeout, which is going to happen, and it's also going to affect the down ballot, in my opinion. So that I think the Democratic Party is likely, and I'm talking from a strictly neutral point of view now, from a 501c3 public interest point of view, with regard to these issues we're dealing with, that the likelihood is probably over 75% that the Democratic candidates are going to win 5 additional seats back in the House of Representatives. So they'll probably take over control after the 2024 election of the House of Representatives. And they'll probably retain control of the Senate. There are 3 Senate seats that are up for re-election in states that are red states that have been won by Donald Trump in the past. But the likelihood is, because of the downdrag or the downdraft effect on the Republican ticket that's going to happen because of Donald Trump being the nominee, the likelihood is that the Senate will be retained, the House of Representatives will be taken over, and so there'll be a second term of the Democratic administration under President Biden. Now, what's going to happen, however, is in that second term, which is what we're going to be dealing with now, aside from the 1-year dynamic that's going to be going on, you'll notice the timing with 180 days between the seating of this panel and them having to get all the information, and then the 180 days before it has to be all released. there's a 1-year process that's going to be going on here, which is all going to be going on basically behind closed doors while the election gets resolved. And assuming the election gets resolved in the way we're talking about, the second term of the Biden administration is going to be the one supervising the first 4 years of this process. But this is a 7-year process, and which means that the election of 2028 is going to be really critical here, because those of us who are longer visioned are in the process of working on that right now. And what's going on now is because the Democratic National Committee has basically struck a deal with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, the Progressive Caucus, with over 100 members of the 435 members of Congress that are in the Progressive Caucus, that they've agreed to stand down and not to field a progressive opponent to President Biden. The Democratic National Committee has announced that they're not going to have any debates, and that Biden is going to be coronated to be the nominee. And because of that, because of the progressives having struck this deal with the Democratic National Committee to stand back and not field a progressive alternative, the Democratic National Committee is going to have to agree to stand back in 2028 and not actively oppose the progressive candidate for the Democratic nomination, like they did Bernie Sanders, for example, submarining him and trying to defeat him, secretly feeding answers to questions to the other candidate, et cetera. So that what's getting ready to happen in 2028 is a major forward surge on the part of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is going to come into place. And so the last 3 years of the period of this disclosure process, this controlled disclosure campaign, is going to be supervised by the progressive element of the Democratic Party. All right, because the Republican Party is going to still be basically in shambles as a result of the 2024 election. It's going to take them more than the 4-year period to reassemble and establish an infrastructure to be able to compete with the Democratic Party. And so that's what we're looking at right now. So that I'll be going to be meeting with Jamie Raskin. I'm going to be meeting with AOC. I'm going to be meeting with the Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C. Not because we favor necessarily the Republicans or Democrats in this process, because this particular process turns out to be one of the truly bipartisan issues that I've ever seen. In like 50 years of experience in Washington, D.C., that the Republicans and Democrats are in the Congress are all in lockstep to get their hands on this information. And they're working out an agreement as to how much of it to really release to the public. But this is a genuinely bipartisan operation that's going on here. And I say all these things about the Republican Party, not to disparage the Republican Party as a whole, but to point out that when you insist upon nominating a person whose company has been convicted already of criminal tax evasion, and is getting set to be prosecuted on 4 major criminal cases, are going to be convicted on a majority of them is going to be sentenced to prison. It's not the best candidate for them to be selecting at this particular time if they were to ask for my advice. So which they haven't, I might point out. But so the bottom line is that's the dynamic that's really going on here. Okay. Now, even though it's going to be quite disruptive, and this 18% of the people can be quite vociferous and even potentially violent, this 1-year period that we're looking at is really going to shake down to a reinstallment of a Democratic administration for a second term under President Biden. And the nominee in 2028 is not going to be Kamala Harris. It's important for people to realize that, that it's going to be somebody else. It's going to be somebody more progressive than that in 2028. And that administration is going to be supervising the rollout of the really hardcore information that is going to probably be postponed under the proposals in this bill, for the first term, okay, or the second term of the Biden administration. And it's going to be in that 3-year period in the first term of the next administration that's going to really be dealing with the hardcore information. Like, for example, what type of communications has our legacy group inside the United States government actually had with the extraterrestrial civilization? Has there been any treaty discussions? Has there been any kind of exchange of technology? Has there been any diplomatic dynamic set up? What kind of information do we know about the configuration of any kind of galactic governing structure here in our Milky Way galaxy? What do we know about all these things? And so those are going to be the crown jewels that are kind of almost certainly going to be postponed longer. Now, one of the very important projects that we're going to be engaged in at the New Paradigm Institute in Washington is trying to formulate a new paradigm worldview to try to understand what the implications are for all of our theories of cosmology and ontology and teleology of the unfolding of our universe. That there's a whole extraordinarily important challenge that we have as a human family. The Catholic Church has issued a major formal statement on November 11th, October 11th, I think, no, November 11th of 2009, under Pope Benedict, of all people, that actually stated that in light of the discovery of more and more of these new exoplanets, because of the spaceborne telescope system that we have now with the James Webb telescope specifically, but also Hubble and the Planck telescope, that it's now very likely that much sooner than had been previously anticipated, we are going to discover that life elsewhere in the universe. And therefore, the time has arrived to commence the extraordinarily important conversation among our people about the philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our human family by the discovery of life elsewhere. Now, that in light of the fact that I've been legal counsel at the Social Ministry Office for the Jesuit headquarters for a decade, I contacted Father Jose Gabriel Funes, who was the head of the Papal Observatory that issued this statement on behalf of the Vatican, and went to see him right away. And within 2 minutes of the conversation, he said, "Look, Dan, we're not talking here about the discovery of some single cell life form beneath some frozen sea on some distant moon in some far off galaxy. We're talking about another highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species right here in our Milky Way galaxy." Okay, that's what we're talking about. That is the moment that has arrived now. And you are all privy in this conversation here this morning to the existence of this program that is now underway. And it's being crafted through the promulgation of this particular act. It's being put into operation by the particular panel that's called for here, that Jim and I and others are involved in the process of setting forth recommendations to the president to who should be on the panel. And we'll be playing a role in helping to promulgate the protocols pursuant to which this information is released. So that's what's happening right now. That's the larger political context in which it's all taking place. And that this is a trans-historical moment in the history of our species on this planet.
Thank you, Danny. Just as we close, I just would take a few minutes to express your sense of what would you say, given everything that you know, and against the backdrop of a national security state apparatus that has been trying to convince us to be afraid. What's your sense of the posture or disposition of being that we humans need to adopt to extraterrestrials at this time?
Interestingly, I think it's the same state of consciousness that the basic major world religions have been trying to get through to us for millennia here, that there's a level of consciousness that our human family is capable of, toward which we're evolving teleologically, historically, but which can be accelerated by paying specific attention to this latent faculty that we have as a human species that is capable of directly, experientially encountering the unitive phenomenon that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified harmonic whole. And that by means of this experience that we can encounter, like seeing or hearing directly, a direct experiential encounter with this unitive reality of our universe, that this is the common means of communion that we have with the extraterrestrial civilization, okay, and the beings from there. And this is a profound, fundamental commonality that we share with the extraterrestrial beings. And so no matter what they look like, no matter how tall they are or short they are, how big their eyes are or how big their head is, or if they even have a head, you know, which from all the accounts that I've heard they do, that this is the means of communion, okay, that we have. So that this is a secret of consciousness. The secret of consciousness, which is at the base of all of the major mystical traditions of our human family, have been attempting to communicate this fundamental secret to our human family for thousands of years. And now the time has arrived when we need to test all of these institutions to see how well we've done to prepare our human family for this moment. That's why it's going to be so important to engage all of the religious communities and the spiritual communities, you know, the indigenous people, the Hebrew people, the Christian people, the Muslim people, all of the Aboriginal people of the world, you know, in sharing their information about this extraordinary dimension of our human family that is real, because this is what we will step forward into the universe to display, rather than our ability to blow up the world, rather than our ability to, you know, manufacture, you know, 1,500, you know, machines that will, you know, to buff your toenails, you know, and have to, you know, you have nuclear power plants to power your fingernail buffers, you know. I mean, this that we've got to go forward with, or our technology that can blow up the world, or to try to strut our stuff to say that we can challenge your technology with our technology. You know, that's not the key that we need to lead with here. Okay. The key that we need to lead with is this access that we have to consciousness, and the fact that we've known this has been taught to us for many millennia now. We have to begin to get the secret, okay? That all these statues that you see of an individual just sitting in meditation, no matter where you go on the planet, that there's another one, you know, they're just sitting there. And they're into some kind of a state of unitive consciousness, and this is the open secret. And so this is the theological issue that the Catholic Church itself has officially announced now, is one of the issues we have to discuss. And so that our job as human beings involved in this UFO disclosure process has to try to make clear what the relationship of this new experience is to the oldest experience of our human family, of our unity with the infinite and eternal. And that's the key to this whole next stage of our human family.
Danny Sheehan, everyone, with whom I have the great pleasure and privilege of working with on this extraordinary project. So Danny, thank you, and I'll see you next week in Washington, and we'll be broadcasting on Humanity Rising from Washington, where I'll be indefinitely in the future, working on this and other issues pertaining to the development of Humanity Rising and, of course, Ubiquity University, but from my new place with the Romero Institute and the New Paradigm Institute. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the chat in the chat box, and all of you received the link to the after chat in the Zoom reminder that you should have received. So it's there for you to join the conversation. Tomorrow we'll be turning to Stephen Dinan, the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, one of the largest networks out there trying to bring transformational learning to a discerning public. So that'll be tomorrow on Humanity Rising. Again, thank you, Danny. Great work. Amazing life you've led.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.